So now we introduced ref, which creates reactive values, which are values watched by view where changes are picked up to be reflected in the template. Now let's add a second value. Let's say besides the username, we also want to output the age here. So for that, we can simply create a constant, for example, add a second ref with a number, for example, and now here I also expose age here in my object, and I'm using age as a key because I'm using age here in the template, and the value for age is UH. And if we do that, we also see the age here. And of course, we could now also change the age here in our timer if we want to. We can assign a new value after 2 seconds, so that if we reload, after 2 seconds, both the name and the age change. Now, since we have two pieces of data, name and age, which kind of belong together, we could also consider grouping them together. So here, instead of creating two refs with two individual values, we could create a user constant and create a ref here which holds an object. And in that object, we have a name, Maximilian, and we have an age, 31. So now we still have a reactive value, but now it's an object where we group the data together instead of having two separate values. Now we could expose the username by getting it from user.value.name. Keep in mind, user is a ref, therefore it has a value property, and the value holds the actual value we stored here, so the object with the name property. And here we have user.value.age. And here in set timeout, instead of changing these two individual values, we now set user.value.name equal to max and set user.value.age equal to 32. If we save that and reload, we see Maximilian and 31, but after 2 seconds, nothing happens. The data doesn't update here. Well, there is a reason for that. When you create a ref with the ref function, you get an object. View gives you an object. We can see this if we console log it here with console log. If I reload, that's our ref object. And there we got this value property in which we actually got such a proxy. You might know this proxy from the behind the scenes module we had earlier in the course. We also have a getter and a setter on this entire ref object. With those, View keeps track of read and write access to the value property. So that if you, for example, access user.value and you assign a brand new object, View is able to pick up this change. But in addition, if you pass an object as a value to ref, that object is also wrapped by a proxy so that View is even able to keep track of internal changes in that object. So for example here, when you drill into the object and you assign a new name and age, as we're doing it here. Nonetheless, as you also could see, View was not able to update the screen, even though I'm just telling you that it would pick up those changes. The problem is how we pass that to our template. Here, we also drill deeply into this object. With user.value, we access the object stored in our ref, and then the name and the age properties. And that's the problem we'll have here. Name and age, these properties in there, the values of name and age, so of those properties, are just regular strings and numbers. These are not reactive values. So therefore, whilst View will indeed theoretically be possible to tell that something changed about user, it does not understand that we're in the end exposing user to our template because we're drilling into user like this. So all it sees is that we expose a string and a number, and since it doesn't track those specific values, it's not detecting any changes there. Now, one thing we could do here is we could provide the entire user object here, so our user ref under a user key to the template, and output that there. If I, for example, add a paragraph here temporarily, I can output user now, because we're exposing this user key here. And if I do so, indeed, you will see my object here, and you see it also changed after 2 seconds. Here you go. And therefore, we could, of course, also output user.name or user.age here. So drill into this object here in the template, and now it would work if I reload. After 2 seconds, it updates. Because now I still drill into this, but only in the template. I pass the raw object, the raw ref object, to the template here in my return statement of the setup function. And that is what matters to Vue. With that, it gets this raw ref object. It has all the reactivity that's in this object, and it knows when we assign a new value, and it knows that we're using this in the template. So then it goes ahead, finds the places in the template where we use this object, and updates that code. And that is how we would use ref correctly with an object instead of separate values. But if you are working with an object, there actually is a better alternative to ref. Instead of using ref, which you could use like this, and of course, by the way, you could now delete all of that, exposing just the user would be enough. But instead of using ref, you can now also import the reactive function, which is also provided by Vue. Reactive is a bit like ref, but it's explicitly made for objects. So now instead of ref, we call reactive, and you still pass your object to reactive. But where ref worked with any kind of value, strings, numbers, and objects, reactive only works with objects here. So you must pass an object to reactive. And now reactive does one important thing. It doesn't wrap this with an extra object which has a value prop which then points at your value. Instead, it makes this object which you pass to reactive by wrapping it into a proxy, so that you can still work with this object as if you would have just that object without any wrapper. We can also see this soon when we see this console log. But that means that instead of accessing user.value.name and user.value.age, you now access just user.name and user.age. So we can skip this .value step because there is no wrapping object with a value property, since we already have an object here and we're using reactive. Now when it comes to exposing, we still expose it as we did it with the ref though. We expose the entire object, we don't drill into it, to give Vue the entire reactive object, and we can now delete those other properties we're sharing here. And then we can use user.name and user.age. So just as before, the key difference is that we now don't have this extra wrapper object with the .value property. So just to bring this back as a comparison, before, with those individual value refs, we had uname.value equal max, and we had uh.value equal 32. Now we directly work with our object as if it would be a regular JavaScript object, but it's actually reactive. So if we save that and reload, we still see that it changes after 2 seconds. Now one note about our console log here, where I'm logging user, before it was this ref object with the value property and the getters and setters for value. Now it's this proxy object here instead, which wraps our object and which simply has these internal listeners to changes to our properties. Basically what I already covered in the behind the scenes module. And with that, I'll delete this console log and leave that code because that's it for now. when we talk about managing reactive data. You got refs and reactive. Reactive is there for objects. Refs are there for all kinds of values, including objects, if you're fine with this extra .value access. It's up to you which one you prefer. If you're dealing with an object, you have the choice between reactive and refs. If you have anything but an object, like a string or a number, it's always a ref. It's also up to you whether you want to group data together into an object or manage data standalone as we did it before. There is no wrong or right way here. It depends on your preferences, the kind of data, what the rest of your team says, and in general, your application, of course. Now you know these two important data management concepts, though, for reactive data, ref and reactive. And with that, let's dig deeper and let's see what else we can do with the composition API.